Hello, everyone, and welcome to my first draft recap. We are going to talk about a draft that I did to help out anybody who's maybe looking to draft, and you can see what I did, say, hey, that was cool, that was fun, let's try that. Or you could say, nope, stay away from that, which is perfectly fine. So, this card here, this was my first pick, and it's a pretty good first pick, something I can kind of build around. Had a lot of fun playing with this guy, and over the course of the draft, I picked up Grunn as well, which was a lot of fun to play, and I picked up Slinn Voda, which was a lot of fun to play. Now, this guy is kind of funny because I heard somebody in the draft say, oh man, no one's ever going to pick Slinn Voda. Slinn Voda is so bad, no one will ever play him. And then I ended up playing him and was fine. He was good. And I also had Verdant Force. Now, Verdant Force is actually not a bad first pick. If you can build around him, get some ramp, get some sapperling support, it's pretty good. But this came in pack 3, probably like mid pack. This was passed to me, and since I was already kind of blue green big stuff at that point, I decided to pick them. And in fact, at one point, I had all 4 of these creatures out on the battlefield at the same time, which was kind of like a draft goal for me. So my draft goals are, maybe, of course, winning is always a draft goal. But if I don't win, then I have these other goals that I can kind of consider winning. So by having all 4 of those out at the same time, that was a win in my book. So one of the other reasons why I stuck with blue-green while I was playing is because both colors were pretty open. And I think probably the worst mistake I made was I did not pick a Cloud Reader Sphinx. I think I took something like, it was either Syncopate or it was maybe Befuddle. If I pick Befuddle over Cloud Reader Sphinx, I'm going to be very upset. But I think it was either Syncopate or it was Blink of an Eye, which of course Blink of an Eye is pretty good. But I think Cloud Reader Sphinx would have been a little bit better, and I'll explain why later in the video. How I was going to get to all of these big creatures was by ramping. So I managed to pick up a Grow from the Ashes, which was really good. And then I also had a Land of War Elves, classic, also really good. And I had an Elfheim Druid. That helped because it also added mana for kicker spells, like for Grunn. And then I picked up Land of War Scout. This card, I only got to use his ability a couple of times where it got an extra land out of my hand and onto the battlefield, but it didn't do too much for me. I think the sweetest thing that happened was I had like 1 land open, and I had Land of War Scout on the battlefield, and then I had 1 land in my hand. So my opponent played something, and I tapped my scout to put the extra land down, and that gave me enough mana to syncopate while my opponent played. That was like the coolest thing that this card did for me the whole draft. So it's kind of cool, but it doesn't really add mana. It doesn't tap for mana, so it's not super spectacular. I also had Broken Bond to kind of put another land out there in the same way of Land War Scout, but never actually encountered any relevant artifacts or enchantments. Round 2, in the second game, my opponent played a History of Benalia, and I didn't have this in my deck, but I had Syncopate, and I had enough mana to play Syncopate, so that was really sweet. That was probably the sweetest play of the whole game that I made with Syncopate, was countering the History of Benalia. So the other cards I used to ramp, here, I'll leave this out here. So of course I put in 1 Power Stone Shard. I had like 4 of them, but didn't want to put 4 of them in the deck when I had all these other good green creatures to ramp. And I also had Jorah's Familiar, because all the big creatures I had, except for Verdant Force, were historic. They're legendary. So that kind of was like a pseudo ramp that also allowed me a flying creature. So out of all the artifacts that I got, I had Power Stone Shard, Jorah's Familiar. I also played a Amaranthine Wall because I needed to kind of slow the game down, and this was a good way to do it. It wasn't really great. It did kind of buy me maybe a turn or two, but it did its job. I also had a Howling Golem. This was really nice because I was looking to draw into, my counters and my ramp spells and other things, so I was able to kind of use him to draw the cards that I needed, and whatever my opponent played wasn't so bad because I usually had an answer or two for it. I had Voltaic Servant strictly for some synergies with the artifacts that I had. There was one time where I got to get 2 Power Stone. Let's see. At the beginning of your end step, untap target artifact. So there was a time where I used a Power Stone Shard on my turn and then tapped it and used it on my opponent's turn. So like that was cool. And then this card actually performed really well. I really like Shield of the Realm, especially since I was trying to kind of stall the game out until I got to play my big creatures. This helped a lot. I put this on an Academy Drake, okay? And my Academy Drake was just a 2/2, and my opponent had some various flyers. But if you read what Shield of the Realm says, it says that if a source, so my opponent could attack, and any one of his creatures would not deal damage to this. And if I attacked and he double blocked, it would be 2 less from each creature blocking the Academy Drake. And none of his flyers had more than 2 power. So it was effectively 0 damage just by attaching the Shield of the Realm to the Academy Drake. So that was very nice. That bought me a few turns. That helped me get to where I needed to be. One thing that didn't work very well for me was Slinn Voda, while sweet, by the time you have 10 mana to play an 8/8 with kicker, chances are that bouncing all of your opponent's stuff is not going to be that great, because there's one time where I had I think Grunn and Verdant Force out on the battlefield, and my opponent had Slimefoot and had enough mana to make 2 Saprolings every turn, so they were matching me on my Saproling creation. And I said, you know what, I'm going to play Slinn Voda and bounce everything. And I did that, and then he was able to replay all of his small dudes, and I had nothing left on the battlefield except for Slinn Voda. And if I had something like the enchantment that gives flying or something that gave trample, I would have been a lot better off. That was kind of the biggest problem with this deck, is it didn't really have a good finisher. I mean, I think I had the one Academy Drake, I had the Djinn, which both had flying, and that kind of helped, but I never had a really good way to close out the game. One of my finishers that ended up performing extremely well was this Sylvan Awakening. So this is how I won one of my games. Was we were kind of like landlocked. We were ground battle locked, and no one was able to get anything through. And then I played this, and I was able to just overwhelm my opponent and push through the last few points of damage. So this was really nice. This was like a pack 2 pick, probably like pick 2 or 3. So I was really happy with how this one turned out. But other than that, I didn't have like a good way to close out the game, which was really frustrating. So I would say definitely if I needed to improve the deck, that's what I would do. Adventurous Impulse, great card. 95% of the time, I liked it. Move that out of the way. 95% of the time, I liked it. The 5% of the time that I didn't like it was when I needed something to close out the game, and Sylvan Awakening was one of the cards that I flipped over. And since it's not a creature or a land card, I had to put it at the bottom of the deck, and that was so disappointing. I ended up losing that game. But I mean, that's the one time where Adventurous Impulse didn't really help me out. So finally, like the last thing I had to kind of stall the game was this Befuddle. It's all right. It's not a great card. It like I said, it stalled. It blanked one of their attacks, which kind of bought me a turn. But I mean, it did what it needed to do, and I did manage to get one Deep Freeze as well. That was pretty good. It's not good when your opponent attaches I think it's called Black Blade Reforged to their defender, because then they had 7 lands, so it was a 7-11. Could go get a Slurpee from this Deep Freeze. But yeah, so Goblin Slurpee, maybe not. So yeah, so that was my deck. I had the ramp package, I had the big creatures, and I had some stuff to make the game go longer to get to my kind of end goal. But it was really missing the big finisher. It didn't have something that could just push through a bunch of damage. It didn't have a trample or flying kind of buff, and that was kind of where this one failed. So I ended up going 1-2, so I won one game and lost 2 others. And the store that I go to gives you 1 pack for showing up and playing, which is sweet, and then 1 pack per win. So out of my 2 packs, my rares were these guys, which isn't bad. This one I feel like could be really fun, build around either for standard or maybe commander. And then Sulphur Falls, I love lands. Lands are like actually my favorite card type in the game, I think. And so that art too is just gorgeous. I love it. Focus. So yeah, I was happy to get that. And that was it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you learned something from it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.